Right. And then we will kick off with the basics, which is this Excel beginner course. There is one more question that I would like to ask, and I'd like you to kind of rate your understanding of Excel, which I know is a difficult thing to do, but in your mind, would you rate yourself as very beginner or a reasonable beginner, or you understand quite a bit already? And if you can, maybe we don't have a poll on that, but if you can maybe also give me an idea in the question box or the chat box as to how you rate your level of understanding with Excel, because that is going to be very important as to how I present and at what speed. So would you give us a bit of feedback there, please?
Just pause the recording there, Connie, and
okay, we can now get into it in earnest, and let's start talking about Excel. You might need to forgive me if I start off a bit very basic. As we've explained, we don't always know exactly where everybody is, and it sounds as if you are reasonable beginners. So if I do start off with very basic stuff, forgive me. We will start picking up the pace soon. Now, what we'll be looking at in these 2 weeks is, firstly, what is Excel? What does Excel do? What is a spreadsheet? Excel alternatives. A workbook versus a worksheet, spreadsheet, cells and references, data types, formulas and functions, and Excel and financial data and other uses for Excel. We'll also be looking at, most probably today still, the backstage. This is understanding the structure of the workbook, which is the backstage, the open, new, save and print, the workspace, the workbook and worksheet again, and maybe a bit more detail, the zoom function, the menus, and the ribbon. Now, a lot of that is maybe construed as theory around Excel, but I do hope that there will be a couple of practical stuff, and hopefully there'll be a couple of things that you can learn out of it. In about 20 minutes from now, I'll be asking you if we are moving too slowly, if we're moving with too much speed, which will guide me as to how, at what speed I should be moving with you. And then at the end of this first hour, we'll be asking also whether you are learning much. So that will give me an idea of whether you are actually learning something out of this, or are you finding it very boring. With next week, we're going to look more practically at the data entry, and we'll add at the end a couple of shortcuts which enables you to be more efficient in the workspace. Efficiency is what it's all about, and I know that often we have a tendency to not really use all the shortcuts that there are. We go the long route via menus, but if you're wanting to be efficient, then shortcuts are needed. And I think in your environment also, time is money, and you need to get through a lot of work. So the more efficient you can be, the better. Good. So let's kick off as to what is Excel. And once again, please forgive me if I'm going a bit slowly, but I'd like to give you a bit of background as to what is Excel. And why I'm doing that is I can remember clearly back in the day, Shane was talking about in the early 90s, when I started working with spreadsheets. Wow, I can really tell you stories, but people really had a trouble in grasping what is a spreadsheet. They had all kinds of ideas as to what it is, what it could do, or what it could not do. And I can clearly remember my parents, for example, they were clueless. And it was a very important thing to actually know and understand what is Excel and what does it do. Now, theoretically, we could say that Excel is a digital spreadsheet program which is used to store and retrieve data in a grid format of columns and rows. Now, columns, you can see here at the top where my mouse is moving now, columns are those, well, rows which are moving from top to bottom. We call that a column. And then on the left hand, you can see the actual rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, data is stored within these columns and rows. And it is how Excel actually functions, is by storing data in these little blocks, in these little, you can think of it almost like a honeycomb. You know, bees make this honey within a honeycomb. There's all these little cells, pockets of honey in the honeycomb, and to a large extent you can think of Excel functioning in that way. At a much later stage, when you might learn about data tables or even drawing information out of a database like a SQL database, they are also information is stored in tables. Right, so information is stored within each and every little block, and I specifically left the grid on so that you can see it is what most people do, so that you can understand that there where I've clicked now, that is an Excel spreadsheet cell or a little data block. Right, so Excel is ideal for entering, calculating and analyzing company data such as sales, figures, taxes or commissions, or whatever needs to be calculated. And in the work environment in all different companies, there's always something that needs to be calculated, and Excel is the ideal thing to do that. Now, you might be working with specific programs like, well, I won't mention any names here, no free advertising, but Shane has a program, for example, that makes a lot of work for accountants easier. But in the background, what's actually happening is a lot the same as what you work with Excel. The thing is with Excel is that you can calculate things that you want to know that you may not be able to do within a set program, like a bookkeeping program. Fine, so a digital spreadsheet is a computer software program that is used for storing, organizing and manipulating data. What's interesting is the digital spreadsheet programs were originally based on paper spreadsheets which were used for accounting. And as such, the basic layout of computerized spreadsheets is the same as the old paper ones. Related data is stored in tables, which are a collection of small rectangular boxes or cells organized into columns and rows. We've had a look at that already. Current versions of Excel and other spreadsheet programs can store multiple spreadsheet pages in a single computer file. Now let me quickly show you what that is. Right down here at the bottom you can see there's a tab, what is Excel? Now that is a spreadsheet. Right at the top you might be able to see the name 0-excelbeginner.xlsx Excel. Now that is the file name or the workbook name, and you can think of it a lot like a normal book. Even a storybook is the name of the storybook would be that name right at the top, Excel Beginner. And within the storybook you have a lot of chapters, and the chapters you can think of as being these tabs right at the bottom, or the sheets, the different sheet names. So we've mentioned here that Excel can store multiple spreadsheet pages in a single file or workbook. And often people ask, is there a limit to the number of spreadsheets that can be contained within a workbook? Not really. There's an unlimited amount that you can have, but it is dependent on the strength of your PC or your laptop memory. The stronger your laptop is, or the stronger your PC is, the more worksheets you can actually accommodate. And as you keep on adding sheets, the file or the book becomes bigger and it might become cumbersome to work with. So if you open the book, it could be taking, well, quite a couple of minutes, depending on the size or the strength of your PC or laptop. Good. Excel alternatives. Shane mentioned I actually started with spreadsheets back in the day with Windows 3.0, and there was an interesting training or help function within that Windows 3.0 which had a lesson on spreadsheets, and it had a tutorial on databases and all that kind of stuff which evolved later into the Microsoft Office suite. And there are still a number of Excel alternatives today which are often used as well for different reasons. And some of the alternatives that are used is, for example, Google Sheets. Now, I'm not sure who of you have actually used a Google spreadsheet before, but this is what it looks like. You can actually go into Google and Google applications, and there they've got a Google spreadsheet which is online. It's not a file or a program on your computer. It's online, and it actually works quite well, and you'll see it looks a lot like Excel. Even though Excel remains the master program or the one that works best, and because it is offline and local, you can use it without being connected necessarily to the internet. Whereas with something like Google Sheets, you need to be connected and online. Now, you also get Excel Online, which is a free scaled down web-based version of Excel. You also get other programs like Office Calc. OpenOffice is well known and it's also used a lot. And these versions are used because they are free. Excel comes at a cost, and some companies do not give all their employees access to the full Excel version. So what I've often found in companies, and I'm actually assisting one of those companies right now, is that management has got Excel, but the folk that are doing the work on the ground, the clerks, are working on free alternatives. So just that you know, Excel is there. Excel is the best there is, and if you have Excel, great. But if not, there are other ways of working with a spreadsheet as well. Good. Understanding the spreadsheet cells and the cell references. When you look at this Excel screen or any other spreadsheet screen, you see a rectangular table or grid of rows and columns. We've already pointed that out to you. You have the columns, which I'm highlighting now. I've highlighted column U, V, W, X, and Y. And you also have rows. I'm going to highlight row 18, 19, 20, just that you can see what I'm talking about. And these form a grid. Now, the grid, for example, I've clicked in V18. How do we know it's V18? Well, if you look at the cell or the block that I've clicked in, you'll see that it lies within column V. If you look at the top, you'll also see that row 18 is slightly highlighted, which indicates that if you go looking for this on a map, the map coordinates or the GPS coordinates would be V18. Now there's another way that you can identify this as well, and here towards the left you'll see that V18 is in that what we call the name box. So the name box will also indicate to you what cell or where you are positioned on the spreadsheet, because it's important knowing where you are. Sometimes you've actually clicked or selected a certain cell elsewhere on the sheet, but now you've scrolled up and down with your mouse button and you don't realize it, but you've actually still clicked in on that other cell, and you think you're going to make changes here where you're looking, but it's not the same thing. So always be mindful of where the active cell is. That's what we actually call it, is the active cell. And you can see what the active cell is if you look at the name box, V18. Good. Now, in the newer versions of Excel, each worksheet, now what's a worksheet again? It's a sheet like this, and there could be multiple worksheets within the workbook. There are roughly 1 million rows. Wow, that's a lot. And more than 16,000 columns, which necessitates an addressing scheme in order to keep track of where data is located, and that we have just indicated to you. How will you know where you are? Because if you're working on a sheet with 16,000 columns, or more than 16,000 columns, and you've got more than 1 million rows, you can really get lost. And you need to know, you need to have a point of reference where you are. Now we all, I think, understand how GPS coordinates work, and as I've mentioned, you have coordinates on a spreadsheet as well. Your coordinates here would then be V18, as I've explained. Good. The other thing to just always understand is that the reference, the cell reference, is always given by giving the column first and the row second. So we would not refer to this as 18V. It would always be V18. You start with the column, the letter, and then the row number. Good. What do we put in these different cells in Excel? Well, you have different data types, formulas, and functions. And the types of data that the cell can hold include, for example, numbers. It can include text. Well, let's give an example. Here where I am at the moment, I've clicked into U26. So let me put a number in there, 1, 2, 3. It can hold a number. It can hold text. Let me type in text into the following cell. There I've typed in text. And you'll notice that different data types are aligned differently by default in Excel. Something to keep in mind, because that's a giveaway at a later stage when you start working with data and how to format data. You'll see here that the number that I've typed in is aligned right by default, and the text is aligned left. And in a later Excel training, if you get there, we teach you that this is one way to identify when a column of numbers does not add up. Something could be wrong. And often what is wrong is that figures have been typed in or entered as text and not as numbers. And when that happens, then Excel does not identify that specific data as a number, and it does not add it up. And you might be wondering why your sums don't make any sense, but it's because certain data has been entered as text and not as a number. And maybe I should give you an example of this while we're about it. I'm going to type in 1, 2, 3 here as well, but you'll notice I'm typing it in slightly different. I've used the equal sign and then the apostrophe and then 1, 2, 3. And Excel is immediately giving me an error, and it's because I've put in the equal sign, but there I've taken it out, and you'll notice that if I type in apostrophe 1, 2, 3, it also displays 1, 2, 3 in the cell, but it's aligned left. If I add these two numbers together, or if I want to add these two numbers together, we will teach you about the formulas and the functions later on, but one place that you can quickly see what the sum is of these different cells is here at the bottom. You'll see there it indicates sum is 1, 2, 3, which of course is very wrong because it should be 2, 4, 6. It should be adding these two numbers together, but it's not doing that because the bottom cell is actually formatted as text and not as a number. So I'm just going back for now to text so that we can continue, and we'll learn more about that later on. It can also contain dates and times. Let me click here in U29 and let me put in a date. Today is the 12th of June 2017, and whoops, let's just open up this column U to be big enough, and Excel sees it as a date, but it's formatted the date a little differently. We typed in the full date, the 12th of June 2017. Now Excel has default values that we will also teach you about, and the default value at the moment is what you see here, 12 hyphen first three letters of the month's name hyphen and then just the last two numbers of the year. You can change that, but later on that. Boolean values, we might not be speaking about Boolean values in this course. Formulas. Now, if we look at a formula, we'll be looking in more detail at later, but you can type a formula in there as well. And that's where the equal sign comes in that I used just now, and which didn't work as it was supposed to work, but it's because it's looking for a formula. When you type an equals, you need to enter a formula. So if I type an equals in there, I could, for example, refer to that 1, 2, 3, which is in U26, and I can type in multiplied by 2 and press the enter button, and there I get the answer 246. You can always see what is typed in as a formula if you look at the formula bar. Now the formula bar is here where the mouse is hovering at the moment. You can see what the formula is by looking at the formula bar, but more about that later. Good. Remember, creating a formula starts by entering the equal sign. So always you'll see in the formula bar, whenever a calculation has to be done, you start off by using the equal sign. There's another way of using the formula bar which will teach you later, and that is using the f of x, or the insert function, which you see immediately to the left of the formula bar. Right, now you've heard me talk about formulas, and I think I mentioned briefly functions earlier, and let me just touch on the two different items. You get a formula and then you get a function. Now a formula is a physical calculation that you type in where Excel has to do a calculation. An example is like this one in U31, where I've said, Excel, go and calculate what the value is in U26 and multiply it by 2. So that is a formula. A function is a whole set of internal formulas that has been built into Excel, and we'll be teaching you a couple of them as we go along. So a function is an internal formula that's been built into Excel and that you call up by using a name. For example, I'm going to type in here equals today and brackets open and closed. Now that is a function. You can see there that even though I've used the equal to sign, I haven't typed a calculation in there. I also haven't typed in a date. But if I press enter, you will see that Excel brings up a date, which is the same date as what I typed in here at the top, but here the format of the date is slightly different to the format here at the bottom. But the equals today with the brackets is a function of Excel, and there's a lot of different functions which we will be teaching you about. Good. Excel and financial data. Now, spreadsheets are often used to store financial data, and I think in your workplace this is specifically true. Formulas and functions that are used on this kind of data include performing basic mathematical operations such as adding up a column or summing up a row. Finding values such as profit or loss. You might identify with a couple of these. You often have to calculate a profit or a loss. Also, calculating repayment plans for things like loans or mortgages, and also finding the average, the maximum, the minimum, and other statistical values in a specified range of data. Pardon me. Also carrying out what-if analysis on data, which is something that we deal with in a more advanced course, where variables are modified one at a time to see how the change affects other data, such as expenses, profits, and the like. What can Excel be used for as well? Other common operations that Excel can be used for include graphing or charting data. Now that, I think, is also something that you've been exposed to, and we also teach that in a more advanced course. If we have the time, we'll give you an introduction to that, and then you can really look smart, and that is how we want you to feel once you have done the course, that you can do fancy stuff as well. And then also to format data to make important data easy to find and understand, and we'll touch on that later. Printing data and charts for use in reports, sorting and filtering data to find specific information, which is also a more advanced course, but let's see how much time we have left in these 2 weeks and what we can teach you. Also linking worksheet data and charts for use in other programs such as Microsoft PowerPoint and Word, which is also a different course that we do with you. And then importing data from database programs for analysis. Good. Before I move on to sheet number 2, the workbook structure. Shane, can we quickly run a poll as to whether I'm going to slow, to fast, or just right? We all know that story about Goldilocks in the forest and the bear's porridge. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Or is it just right? Over to you, Shane.
Okay, I've got the poll going. There we go, guys. There's 3 options. I must say I'm hoping that nobody's complaining about you going too slow. I don't think there'll be anybody voting for too fast. Connie, I personally think this is just right. And I'm really enjoying the detail that you're going through, and I enjoyed the background. And also what's very interesting for me, I think you know that I'm very keen on teaching the efficient way of working with Excel, and I see that you're doing that right from the beginning as well. Like, for example, simple example, you're showing the guys they must click on equals and then click on a cell rather than typing in the cell address. It's amazing. I see guys that have been using Excel for 20 years. I mean, using Excel for 20 years, and they reckon they know all the tricks, and you still see them going and they go equals and they start typing out the cell reference. And I think, come on, guys. There's a quicker, more efficient way of doing that, which is the way that you're showing. So thank you for that. Connie, I'm going to share the results. I think everybody's voted, so let's just share this. There we go. You can see it in black and white, 100% vote. Everybody is saying just right. So Connie, you just keep going. You're doing a stunning job, and thanks for your positive feedback, guys. I think that somebody, just before we get going, Nazira has also sent through a message. She said it's yes, perfect. Okay, so that was, I think, in response to one of my, I sent her a message. Okay, Connie, so back to you. I think it's all good. Keep going, man.
Great. Wonderful to hear. Right, now we're going to go over to the workbook structure, and remember that you will be receiving this workbook after the fact. I specifically didn't want you to have it before we started, otherwise you open the spreadsheet and you want to see what's going on there, where I think it would be more beneficial if you just watched and listened and then did the exercises afterwards. So, looking at what I have before me, which is what you will have soon, is we will now click on the second worksheet, which is the workbook structure. And if you click on that, you see, wow, aren't we doing anything here because it's all blank? No, we'll actually be doing quite a bit. But I just want to introduce you, since we'll be doing a lot of this later on. I just want you to know what is meant by the backstage, so that you know it exists and where it is and what it does. And we'll also do that with these other items on the sheet. So I'm just wondering whether we should drop in one little wow. Well, I hope it's going to be a wow. We're talking about this grid, and you can see all the cells and also the columns. And you are wondering, but is there a way to get rid of these lines? Now, I just want to show you there is a way, but I don't recommend it in the beginning. You might want to do it at a later stage when you present data and you want it to look, well, kind of fancy without having all the lines. Right at the top here, you will see there is a view menu. And if I click on that view menu, there's a couple of things I can do here. But here's a little box that says grid lines, and it has got a tick mark in it. Now, simply by ticking or unticking this box, you can remove all the grid lines here and also put them back. And I know plenty of folk, I actually battled with it in the beginning because I thought this has got something to do with borders. And it's actually got nothing to do with borders, but it's got everything to do with the grid lines. If I tick this grid lines box, then you will notice that suddenly the whole sheet is white. There's no grid lines. Isn't that a great trick? And if you tick that again, then the grid lines are back. Right, that was just a side note. So we are back to understanding the workbook structure. We've explained that there are tabs at the bottom, or worksheets. There's a lot of different names, but they are worksheets, and the names of the worksheets are indicated by the name that has been typed on the tab. Then we still have the workbook there right at the top. And now within this workbook and within this worksheet, you must now remember you are working with both a workbook and then what is within this workbook, and certain things are available throughout. If you use the menus here at the top, and actually anything else that you do here on the ribbon, you are working within the framework of the book, but you are working relevant to the tab that you are busy with. And you learn a lot more about that at a later stage, about how you must be on the active sheet. Remember, I said as you click on a cell, it is the active cell, the one that you've clicked on, in this case K7. Now, the worksheet that you are busy working on is also the active sheet. And believe me, you also need to know which is the active sheet that you are actually working with at the moment. As you progress with Excel, you could be working with other sheets or actually picking up data out of other sheets, and your way of working could be not working so well if you don't know which is actually the active sheet. But okay, at a later stage. Right now, this that you are looking at the moment, I don't really have a name for it other than to say that this is the worksheet front end that you are looking at. This is the front of the sheet. If it was a piece of paper, this would be the sheet of paper in front of you. But there is a backstage, a back office view. And the backstage is to be found if you click on the file menu at the top left. If you're wondering what these thingies are here at the top, that is the quick access toolbar. And you can access things by opening up the toolbar there and also selecting certain things, making them visible or not. But we won't work with that too much right now. It's more important that you understand the menu and the ribbon. So good. If we click on File, we immediately go into the backstage view. This is almost like the back office where you make things happen. You may have a shop which has an admin office at the back, and while everything's happening in the front end, in the shop, here you are in the admin office at the back doing the books, etc. So this is everything that can happen here. Firstly, you have an info sheet, and I don't think I'll be running through all of the options here today, but as we move along we will touch on more of them and also in more advanced courses. What you might see here, and you might not use all of these, is you have the option on the info bar to actually protect the workbook. We won't be working with that now. It's a later course, a more advanced course. And the inspector workbook you won't be working with right now. And I don't think we will touch on the manage either, and also not the browser view option. So the info is purely there for info, and we will not do anything for the purposes of this course right now. What you do have is you do have the new tab, and if you click on the new tab, you will see that you can actually start a new workbook, not a new worksheet. If you want to create a new worksheet within the workbook, there's a different way of doing it, and we'll teach you how. But this is if you're wanting to start a whole new book. And wow, there's lots of templates depending on what your version of Excel is. But there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can have a look at here and play around with. But for practical purposes, you will normally use the blank workbook. So if you're wanting to open a new blank workbook, you would click on this, and voila, it would open a book 1 if you look right there at the top. Now, your spreadsheet that you were working with hasn't disappeared, but there are now 2 spreadsheets. You will see here, if you look at the bottom, your Excel beginner spreadsheet is open, and your new spreadsheet or workbook is also open as well. So both of them are open. I'll be closing this for now, and we'll look at more detail there at a later stage. Going back into the backstage, something that is important here is the save and the save as, and at a later stage also the print. Now, if we look at the save command, let's understand the difference between save and save as. If you click on save, it will save the workbook under the current name that it has, unless it's a new workbook that has not been given a name yet. So if you clicked on new and you opened a blank workbook, now this, as you can see, is named now book 2. Excel remembers how many times you've opened a new book until you exit Excel and then log back in again. If you went to the backstage and you clicked on File and you clicked on save, Excel is going to ask you to provide a name. It will first ask you for where you are wanting to save the document, and you will select a place, and it will ask you to rename the document. You can retain the name that it has, Book 2, but you also have the option to rename the document. I will keep Book 2 just for the purposes of this exercise, and now every time you go in and you save the document, it will save it under that name Book 2. There you see. However, if for some reason you're wanting to make a copy of this book, just for backup purposes, and believe me, this is a good habit to actually form, is to make backups or master copies of important workbooks. You can then use, I'm going to close this one, our workbook that we're working in at the moment is this Excel Beginner. But if I'm concerned that I might mess up stuff here and I'd like to keep the original intact, because remember here I've gone and I've done a couple of stuff and I've put in data and all kinds of stuff, and I'm not sure if all of that is going to mess up my spreadsheet or not, I can go and save a copy or a master copy of this by clicking on File and then Save As. You then have the option to go and rename the document. You can rename it Excel Beginner Master or Copy 2 or whatever your way of naming your documents are. But you can then save a secondary copy or an additional copy of the workbook under a different name. And then you can get back to your original document or open your original document and carry on with whatever it was you were doing. Good. I hope that was clear. You also have the print option here at the back, and we won't be going into detail this round, but when you are in the back office and you click on print, it will identify what printers you are connected to. You can choose the number of copies that you would like to print, and as you can see here, it also gives you an idea of what the printed copy is going to look like. So you'll be able to see, ooh, does this look right or wrong? You might find that your data is actually spreading over a couple of pages, and we deal with that also later. But when we just have a little bit of information, this is ideal. It tells you what it is that's going to print out, and you can then also choose what must be printed. And what's actually interesting also is to have a look at the size that is going to be printed, because you need to usually ensure that this is an A4. Sometimes you may use the letter size, but usually you would want to print in an A4 environment. You'd also like to maybe set your margins, and if you open your margins, you could go for wide margins, narrow margins, or we were on normal. And then you can also, the one that you'll probably be learning to use most is right at the bottom where you see no scaling. There's options here, and one that is very popular to use is to fit sheet on one page. So if you see that your data is spreading over more than this one sheet, and it's not too way out and you'd like everything on one sheet, you can select this and you can fit the sheet onto one page, and Excel will automatically then bunch up your data and put everything on one sheet so that it prints only on one sheet. You can also select, maybe it's a very long list that you have in Excel, and you understand that you can't put all of those rows onto the one sheet or onto the one page, but you would like, there's a couple of things to the right which are outside your worksheet, and you'd like to bring that all in. So you might want to select fit all columns on one page. Now that does not mean that it will select all the columns on the sheet, but it's up to where the data ends. Wherever you've entered the data into, It will not be those thousands of columns. It will just be up to where the data ends, and it will fit all of those onto one page. And then if you have multiple pages, it will only be because the number of rows down towards the bottom are many rows. You also have the option to fit all the rows on one page, and that you might not have all the columns on one page, but Excel will then do the necessary calculations to fit all the rows on one page. So hopefully that gives you just an idea of what is possible here in the Backstage view and with your printing options. Once you've selected all your options, you can click on print, and you will then be able to print the number of copies that you have selected. At a later stage, we can give you more detail, but just that you are aware, there is a share button here as well, and you can share this document to a different place, and you can either save it in the cloud if you are sharing it with people, but that's a more involved situation that we can deal with in later courses. But what's very popular is to share this sheet via email. And I know that many times you will go to your email client or whatever you're using for your emails, and you will attach a document, and the document that you will attach would be this document, Excel Beginner. But you can actually do it right from within Excel. And if you click on the email button, it will ask you, send as an attachment, send as a PDF, and you'll most probably not use the XPS, so ignore that. You might send as an internet fax document if your machines have been set up to use a fax program, but that's not used much nowadays. If you are using it, we can go into that in a little more detail, but I don't think you'll need it. Mostly you'll be sending it as an attachment. So Excel will attach this document to an email message. And let's click on this, send as an attachment, and you'll see what's happening now. It's opened my Outlook, and it has automatically attached this Excel Beginner document to my email message, and all I have to fill in is the email address that I'll be sending it to, and all I have to do then, I better close all my reminders, all I have to do then is to click on send, and voila, Excel together and combined with Outlook will then send this via email as an attachment. Good. So that is the main items that you will be using here at, in the Backstage view. There are more options, but for the purposes of this exercise, I don't think you'll be using any of them except maybe the close option to close your workbook, but I wouldn't mess around with any of these others at this point in time. So you've then seen in the Backstage how to open. No, we didn't show you how to open. Let's quickly do that. You've seen the new, how to create a new workbook. We also then have the open option where you can open a second workbook, and it will give you, Excel will actually give you a list of the most recent documents that you've worked with. You can see here today, yesterday, and last week. So you can either select one of those documents, or you can browse here at the bottom. As you click on browse, it will then take you to your file structure on your PC where you can navigate and select a document that you want to open. So you could click there on book 2, for example, and you could open it, and Excel will open book 2. Good. So you have seen the open, the new, the save, and also print. The workspace, you hopefully understand, is this whole workspace that you can see here in front of you right now. You understand the difference between the workbook and the worksheet. The workbook is this big book, the file here at the top, and the worksheets are these tabs at the bottom. Now the menus, before I get to Zoom, the menus are here at the top, and it will also differ slightly depending on your version of Excel. It could be capital letters. This is 2016 where it's back to the real case with capital and then small letters, but all of these chappies up here are the menu or the main menus that you have to deal with. You also have the ribbon. Now the ribbon is this whole space that you see here from left to right with all these commands in just beneath the menu. That is the ribbon, and here once again are actually a lot of sub-menus. So you have the main menus at the top, and depending on which menu you select, you will have a lot of sub-options or sub-menus, and they are grouped. Here you can see this has to do with the clipboard. That's all of these options. This has to do with the font. This has to do with alignment. This has to do with the numbers. This has to do with styles. This group deals with the cells, and this group deals with editing. So it's a lot of sub-menus that you can select specific directives from. And then lastly, before we go off on a break, I'd just like you to know, if you don't know, how to zoom in and out. Here towards the bottom right, you will see here at the bottom, oops, is a slider. And if I hover my mouse over that, you'll see it is a zoom. And you can move that slider left or right, or you can click the minus button or the plus button to either zoom in or to zoom out, depending what size of the workbook or what space you want to view within the workbook. And that, folks, brings us to the end of the second tab on our course for today. And before we break, may I ask Shane to please bring up the second poll, which will give me an idea. Yes, okay, we're moving maybe at the right speed, but are you actually learning anything, or are you learning absolutely nothing? Shane, if you'll be kind enough to bring that poll up for us, and that will, I think, bring us to more or less 11:05 or just before, and then we can break for 10 minutes.
Hey, thanks, Connie. I'll do that. I'll run the poll now. So there we go, guys. Give us your feedback. I am learning. The first option there, very little. Heaven forbid. I hope that there aren't any folks saying they're not learning much here. I've even picked up a few things, and I've been teaching Excel for ages, but I've missed out on some of the thorough bits that you've been covering there, Connie. Thank you for that. The second option is a fair amount, and then I'm hoping, just hoping, that most of you guys are going to be saying a lot. So let's just give you a few seconds to vote. There we go. Almost all done. And in fact, Connie, yes, you've done it again. I'm just going to close the poll and share the results with you guys so that you can see it. There we go. I'm not kidding you. 100%. Everybody who's voted has said they are learning a lot.